Hi, I'm Paulina, CEO of Spakinect. Today, I'm sitting down with Sara Shikhman, Managing Partner of Lengea Law. Hi, Sara. Thanks for being here with me today.
Hi, Paulina. Nice to be here.
So, Sara, can you tell us a quick bit about yourself and what type of clients you serve in this industry?
Definitely. So my law firm and I represent over, I guess, 1,200 now practices in the aesthetic space.
Wow.
Before starting the firm in 2019, I was the lead lawyer for a big multi-state med spa and aesthetic software company that whose name you guys may know. And I also wrote a book about how to start a med spa called Medspa Confidential. And together with my team, our whole job is basically helping med spas succeed from the legal perspective and helping people on their worst days when they're investigated by boards, and working with great companies like Paulina's to make sure that people are compliant.
Fantastic. I have heard about your book and I look forward to reading it. There's not a lot of books about the med spa industry, so that's really fascinating.
Thank you.
So, Sara, today I want to talk about the standards of care in telehealth. Telehealth obviously has grown a lot over the last 10 years, and specifically to the medical spa industry, which is now a booming industry. We're seeing it grow every year, almost doubling in size. And so I want to talk a little bit about people who are looking to implement telehealth in their practice, the different types of telehealth that they can implement, and what things that they should be aware of and looking out for their state boards.
Perfect. Yeah, this is a very timely question because of how popular telehealth is becoming.
Exactly. So, to my understanding, there's two types of telehealth. There's asynchronous telehealth, and then there's synchronous telehealth. Can you just give a quick explanation of what each of those means?
Yeah, so typically, synchronous telehealth would be something that involves real-time communication, like FaceTime, Zoom, like what we're doing now, where we can have a conversation back and forth, where you can ask me a question and I can give you an answer. And then asynchronous telehealth is where, let's say you would email me your questions and then I would write my answers, or you would ask me, hey, is Sarah cleared for treatment? And I would write back, yes, as
Okay.
the provider.
Okay. So a real-time interaction versus a store and forward type communication for via
Exactly.
email or messaging of some kind.
Yep.
So with that being said, there are standards of care that are put out by the medical board and nursing board for traditional in-practice medicine and for telehealth. How would you say that the standard of care is different in telehealth versus an in-person interaction, meaning a physical in-person interaction? I'm coming into the office and I'm doing an evaluation on a patient. What is the difference between the standard of care in those two scenarios, or is there a difference?
Good question. So most boards expect that there would be the same standard of care met, whether you're doing like telemedicine, synchronous or asynchronous, or in person. So if you are able to ascertain, if let's say you're prescribing drug X and that requires you to see if the patient is obese, has high blood pressure, or is allergic to Y, you're supposed to be able to do that in person, and then the same standard of care via telemedicine, synchronous or asynchronous. So as being able to ask the same questions, get the same answers.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do you think standards would differ between an asynchronous visit and a synchronous visit?
I think they would have to be as similar as possible. I think that you should be able to have a very comprehensive form in
Mm.
case of the asynchronous visit. So, and then including pictures if you need them, and the statistics about the patient. And then they have to be able to be reviewed, and then questions asked about them, not just signed off blankly on every single form. But if there's a question or if there's something ambiguous, the provider has to be able to then clarify something with the patient. Again, it could be asynchronous, but I think to meet the standard of care, there would have to be this clarification opportunity.
Right. So I think that's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about, you said, as long as it meets the standard of care. How does one know that they are meeting the standards of care, and who decides what that standard is?
Great question. It's certainly not me or any other lawyer. I would say that it would be decided, and each state would kind of decide in its own way, but generally the medical board would look to some sort of medical experts about standard of care. They would see how other people are doing it, if there's any published studies or articles about it. And if there's not, which, being realistic, in a lot of these things that are being prescribed by telemedicine now, there may not be. They're just going to look and in their minds see whether it makes sense. So there isn't going to be like a document that says, okay, the standard of care is this or that. It's going to be more like, based on the type of exam that you did, was it safe for you to prescribe to this patient in the way that you did?
Right. That's a really good point, because a lot of people, and I'm sure you get this too, but people come to us and they want to know what it is in black and white. And it's really hard to tell somebody that, because oftentimes there is a lot of gray and there's things that are left up. People have to infer or up to interpretation. So I'm wondering, I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you follow best practices and you sort of look around at what other leaders in the industry are doing, or what you should do in a situation, whether that's in person or telehealth, that those standards should never differ, that you should be able to offer the same level of care as you would if somebody came into your office, that you can via telehealth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's a good summary for sure.
Okay. Okay. And thankfully, there's a lot of technology now that allows you to do so much via telehealth, because even 10 years ago, that was not the case. And now, especially with AI, there are just emerging technologies where you can look into the screen of your mobile device, and it can take your blood pressure from your retina, and it's seemingly much more accurate than we would have thought years ago. So it's really amazing that we have this technology, excuse me, where now people are gaining access to care in a lot easier and more efficient way, and it still can maintain that standard of care by the medical and nursing board's standards.
Yeah, definitely. And it also depends on what's being prescribed, right? I think the standard
Right.
of care and what needs to happen really depends on what the thing is that people are being given, right? Like, I would imagine the standard of care is different when someone's being prescribed Botox versus when they're being prescribed semaglutide. The level of due diligence that you have to do ahead of time is different.
Right.
And the questions you have to ask is different. So I think it also depends on like what it is that you're doing.
Right. That's such a hot topic right now. Why don't we actually talk about that for a minute? Everybody's doing weight loss now. Everyone's offering this. I think it's here to stay. So if somebody does want to offer this in a telehealth environment, where either they're shipping the medication to the patient, or maybe patient comes in for their initial consult, and then after that, they're shipping medication to the patient. What do you think people need to be aware of in terms of offering telehealth visits for people who are getting these weight loss medications?
Oh, there's so much. We have a couple of clients who are 50 state semaglutide and other the drugs like that businesses, and it's definitely a thorny field. So like, one question is, should labs be run on people,
Mhm.
right?
Which that's a question we get all the time as well, right? And the question is really about, is this mandated, right? Do we have to? And I think that that kind of leads into the ambiguity we were talking about earlier. So I'm interested to hear what your perspective is.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is I'm not a doctor. I wouldn't be able to tell you, and no lawyer should, like whether you should do labs to
Mhm.
prescribe a particular drug.
Right.
And neither should a good faith exam provider service. I would say I would defer to the medical director of the practice as to what they want to do.
Right.
I haven't seen any literature that would mandate running labs for this
Mhm.
particular treatment. But I could see a medical board or a nursing board in some state taking a stricter stance. And if they really want to come after someone for something, saying, well, you didn't meet the standard of care if you
Mhm.
didn't do labs. I think as with any new drug, or any drug that becomes so popular, there's a
Mhm.
lot more scrutiny. So I think that
Right.
even if there's nothing that says you have to do labs, if if it's possible to do labs, I would almost say, look, why don't you give the option to the patient and say, hey, here's a checkbox, like you check that you didn't want to do labs here. Or you can here pay another $50 and go to, drop off this form at LabCorp and they'll run your labs. So I think it is possible to pretty seamlessly do that, but I haven't seen it be legally required anywhere.
Right. So in that case, because there is sort of a lack of an example, case law to go off of, let's say that somebody was not doing labs and then they have one of their patients has a complication and they file a complaint with the medical board. If you were, and this is just hypothetical case, but if you were to represent a client like that, is if there is nothing to say, hey, we think that we're following the standard of care. There's no sort of case law or anything to say otherwise. In your experience, do you think that some medical boards would use that case to make an example out of for future?
Um, I think it's, as of today, I would say it's unlikely but possible. I
Mhm.
think that like what we do is one of our team members, his full-time job is basically monitoring like any discipline that happens across the country and researching like any updates to the laws. And so we haven't seen a medical board require this, and we
Mhm.
haven't seen like a lot of the license proceedings are public. So you can search
Mhm.
and see like, oh, like these physicians in Texas, lost their license and this is why, or they were reprimanded and this is why.
Mhm.
So it hasn't happened because of this yet, at least in a public way. Um, I think that if the people were doing something else that was kind of a gray area or the board didn't like it, like for example, if their medical director was, in California, but they were a New York practice,
Mhm.
something that just the board just innately don't like,
Right.
but is not technically against the law in many states. I
Right.
think then they would try to find other things to at least create questions.
Right, right. Because the medical board can do that, right? If there's a complaint filed about a patient who was bruised and then they file a complaint, once they get in there, do they have full reign now to really look into all aspects of your business?
Yes, all aspects that fall under their umbrella. So everything from is your office clean to are you following the right delegation, scope of practice, patient advertising, correct licensure, anything within their purview, they can begin investigating other things. And what they typically do, or at least they've been doing more of in many states, is like, let's say you get a visit from the medical board. They will also loop in the nursing board and the cosmetology board and the pharmacy board. So it's not, even if everything with the medical board goes well, typically they'll pull the resources of the other agencies then and like start a multi-agency process. If they really, upon coming to your practice, find that there are things there that they don't like.
I see. So you could open yourself up to a lot more risk and involvement by other boards by just seemingly having some, maybe you don't have SOPs in place, or you sort of have one red flag, it can trigger them to really start to go down the rabbit hole and look into all these other things that you might not have even been aware of that you were not doing right or doing incorrectly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the number one way they end up coming in is they get some anonymous complaint usually by an ex-employee or a competitor. And usually I would say 80% or more are about improper delegation, or more specifically, if you don't have anyone doing good faith exams, whether by telemedicine or on site. So if you just have an RN working there, it's just a matter of time, typically these days, until an investigation happens. That's where we're seeing like all the investigations happen.
Interesting. So if, let's say there was an investigation opened in regards to delegation, what does that mean for a client? Can you kind of take us through what is that client going to have to go through now if the medical board pays them a visit and opens up an investigation into their practice?
Yeah, so typically the way that it happens is someone from the medical board makes an appointment at your practice pretending to be a patient. And then right before,
Interesting.
yes,
I don't know if a lot of people know that that happens. So I love that you said that.
yeah, so, and they're, like, they don't have a particular like look or feel, like you wouldn't know. So
Mhm.
let's call this investigator Martha. So this person comes in, they're on your schedule, they pretend to be a patient, you're a registered nurse. You're about to inject them with filler, and right before you're about to do it, they're like, "Oh, my name is Martha, you're under investigation. Can I speak to your medical director?" And
Gave me
like,
chills.
yeah, so and that's how it works. Like, we get the call usually when this happens, and the number one thing I would say is first train your staff that if that happens, don't panic. You don't have to give everything to the board in that very minute. Call your lawyer and tell the board, okay, we appreciate your visit. Thank you. Our lawyer handles this kind of stuff for us. Here's their information. They'll be in touch with you. So you don't have to all of a sudden like open up everything and show them
Mhm.
the whole, everything under the kitchen sink. So
Mhm.
that's like, I think a very important tip. So then, okay, this person comes, let's say, the person that they speak to doesn't know this, and they say, oh, my medical director is not here today. And they're like, okay, well, who's the, nurse practitioner who does the good faith exams for your practice? And they'll say, well, we don't have one, or whatever, they say something. And then they'll say, okay, well, for all the patients for this week, can you send us a copy of their charts? Can you send us a copy of all your training certificates for this, let's say, dermal filler that you're about to do on me? Can you send me a copy of how your practice is structured, like all the ownership documents, and then any delegation agreements, and protocols. So they would typically ask for all of those things and give you like a super tight deadline, like 10 days or 5 days.
Wow. So it really behooves practices to have a attorney on hand that they've already established a relationship with, obviously, to make that phone call quicker and that process probably easier. But I'm sure that that doesn't happen all the time, because not all practices either can afford one or have gotten to the point where they've set up a relationship with a firm like yours. So what would you do in the case if you got a call from somebody you've never heard from and they said, can you help me? The medical board is here right now.
I would say, oh, okay, the medical board is here right now. Let's see, where's your practice? What's your name? We have to do a conflicts check to make sure that, we haven't represented someone that would be in conflict with you. We would do that quickly. And then I would literally talk to the investigator on the phone and say, oh, we represent this practice. Give us your information. We'll be in touch to sort of diffuse the situation and have a go from there. But typically what happens is the practice gives people something. So they may not know that they need an attorney, or they may not have an attorney. So someone shows up, the practice gives the investigator some initial stuff, and then they're like, oh, I should call an attorney. And then,
Mhm.
but at that point, it's a little bit later in the game because they may have given the investigator something that incriminated them in some way.
Right,
So
right.
then we sometimes have to tell the investigator, well, we have the corrected version of that if there's like a more complete document, or it's a delicate balance. And typically what the investigator likes to do is have in-person interviews. So in addition to providing like the paper stuff, they'll typically come to your office or have you come to their office and interview you and your staff one-on-one, not in a group, and then see if you guys contradict each other. But you could have a lawyer present with you, either through Zoom or in person for those things. So the investigators are pretty smart. I mean, they know what they're doing, so they're very they're taking notes as you're talking to them.
Mhm.
And like literally we've had practices where 5 people got interviewed and then they're asking each person the same question and the people are answering the questions differently.
Right.
But the good news is the standard is not perfection. So I like this is becoming a very scary Zoom, maybe let's take it a step back, right? Like, even if your practice is in violation of some things, it
Yes.
doesn't mean that like you're gonna have to close your business and you're gonna go to jail and you're gonna lose your
Right.
license.
Right.
Like, most of these things are solvable issues, and the investigators and the boards will give you a second chance most of the time, unless you were just blatantly violating the rules. Like, if you never had good faith exams done and you have an RN working there and she did, she saw 5,000 patients, it's going to be really hard to argue that you just like misunderstood.
Right.
But if like you have some smaller areas of non-compliance, usually there's what's called a settlement that the boards will do, which is
Okay.
usually private. So you pay like some amount. Some of the boards ask you to propose the amount yourself. So let's say you say $1,000. So you pay $1,000, you enter into this private settlement, you agree not to do it again, and you move on.
Understood. Okay. So there's a way out. There's a light at the end of the tunnel if you have been investigated. And I talk to a lot of clients that have been part of an investigation. And I myself have personally sat in on investigations where our clients were investigated. So I completely understand what the process that you're talking about, and being interviewed one-on-one, which can be nerve-wracking for sure. But I think what I like to tell people, and I know I've heard you say this before, is that, it's likely that at some point in your life cycle of being in business as a medical spa, that somebody will file a complaint that the medical board will have to look into, or the nursing board. So it's always best to make sure that you have all of the SOPs and everything in place, and that you've consulted with somebody, that you're doing things up to the standard of care or best practices for your state.
Yeah, definitely. I think an investigation is almost like a sign of success these days.
Yeah.
Once you reach a certain size.
I actually like that you say that, because I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And it's another way of looking at it, right? The more you grow, the more you expand, and especially into different states that might be new territories, that getting an investigation is a sign of growth and success. So that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, it's life, right? Like sometimes that's just how it works. I mean, look, if you were not a threat to that big plastic surgery practice in town, they wouldn't call the medical board on you. But since you've become successful enough, they did. Like, I know in some places in the Midwest where we've worked, there are some big plastic surgery groups, and that's kind of like their MO. They once you get to a certain size, they file a complaint against you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So have you noticed that, are there any states in particular where you feel like the medical and nursing board are sort of more involved with looking into aesthetic practices versus other states?
Yeah, definitely. I would say Ohio, North Carolina, New Jersey, a little bit of Arizona and Texas. And then interestingly and surprisingly, I would say like not so much in New York or California. I think those boards are just overwhelmed with work and there's so many people. So I think that they're just not maybe not the manpower or women power,
Interesting. Right.
but that's what I'm seeing. I think, yes, especially lately, we've seen a lot of stuff in North Carolina.
Interesting. What are some of the common themes that you're seeing in North Carolina right now?
Ownership issues. So people who don't have an MSO and MSA structure and should. Improper delegation / no good faith exams. So people where there's just an RN and no one's doing even a remote good faith exam. We're seeing issues with just like website marketing and the website not listing who the medical director is, and it people complaining that that's misleading. So I would say those have been the main issues.
Interesting. So you touched on, you said good faith exams for North Carolina. I'm curious about what your perspective is on there. From what I understand, that North Carolina has explicitly stated in some of these investigations that the good faith exams, they want them to be synchronous. So the real-time interaction. Some states do allow for asynchronous visits for telehealth as long as it meets the standard of care. But can you tell us anything that you know or you've seen lately in North Carolina in regards to their requirement for telehealth exams?
Yeah, I think it's been sort of inconsistent. We've seen people get investigated for doing asynchronous telehealth, and then we've seen people get investigated, and we clearly showed them how they do good faith exams, and they were totally asynchronous, and the board was totally okay with it.
Oh, that's
So
really interesting.
yeah, I think there's not like, I don't think that with boards there's like a lot of even communication between investigators. Sometimes, depending on which investigators you have, you may get a slightly different outcome.
That's very interesting and probably can be frustrating for some of your clients as well. Was there anything different in the clients where they were doing asynchronous visits and the board didn't have an issue with that? Were they doing anything sort of in addition to other clients?
No, no, they really weren't. It's not like they were doing something extra to show that they met the standard of care. It's just the board just wasn't focused on that particular issue for that client. So yeah, I just don't think the application of the rules is consistent by the board. And I'm not aware of any law in North Carolina that says that good faith, that these examinations have to be synchronous. So it's like, I think there was recently a Supreme Court ruling on this that talked about like the power of administrative agencies and their power to, do they have power to really like go beyond and try to make new laws or make their own interpretations of laws. And the ruling said, actually, no, they don't. So I feel like depending on who gets elected this November also, will also change how active these government investigations are. I think Trump is more into like smaller government, less administrative agencies, trying to not hire more government workers. So that could be good for this space. At the same time, like, you know, that comes with its own sets of problems. So we'll see what happens.
So do these medical boards, we have 50 states, do the medical boards talk to each other at all? Is there any sort of internalized, centralized system?
Sort of. So there are some states that are considered compact states. If you get your licensure through the compact, then they report violations to their like compact states. But even if two states are compact states and you didn't do your licensure through the compact, they may not talk to each other. So they're not like big technology users. Like, for example, some boards will only use fax and mail and like will not email. So I don't think that right now there's a good 50 state database, which is, you know, good for our clients, but I think it'll probably change. But typically, unless it's part of the compact, the boards do not talk to each other.
Okay. Yes, that would be, I think, a win-win, especially for licensing, we have so many providers and a lot of our clients are in so many different states that we're always saying, maybe somebody who's listening will come up with an idea, but you know, why can't we have an easier way to apply for licensure in, you know, all 50 states? They're all have different processes, right? And like you said, some are by mail, by fax, which I don't have a fax machine, so I don't know how I would communicate with any of these medical or nursing boards that only use fax machines.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, like the fact that, you know, the way you would treat a cold is the same in New York or California, right? So then why should there be like state-specific licensure?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think with law, it's a little different because the state by state laws are a little bit unique, but still, even that doesn't make that much sense because shouldn't they be similar? But
Mm-hmm.
in medicine, it's exactly the same. So
Mm-hmm.
it is strange that the states are not more, I don't know, aligned
Congruent.
with this. Yeah.
Right. So I want to maybe round this out by asking a question about specifically telehealth with good faith exams. So is it your opinion that a good faith exam is required in all 50 states for any medical procedure?
Um, because I'm not licensed in all 50 states, I can't legally say it's like
Okay.
my opinion, but I would say it is my opinion that it would be a best practice,
Okay.
the safest practice.
Okay.
Because even if there's some ambiguity in some states,
Mm-hmm.
the basic principle of medicine is you need a prescription to get a drug, and
Right.
a nurse cannot write a prescription.
Right.
Based on that, in every state to get a drug, you need to have a prescription written by a prescriber who has to be at minimum an NP or PA.
Right. So even though there might not be explicit sort of standards of care written by your state medical board, like we talked about in the beginning, following best practice is what's going to be recommended for people who come your way, people who come my way. Obviously, I cannot tell people how they should practice, but I always recommend they follow those best practices. And so in most states, what we always recommend is that there, like you said, the requirement to make sure that RNs are not operating outside of their scope, that they are getting that order from somebody who has prescriptive authority within their scope. And I think what it comes down to is that some states are going to enforce that a lot more than other states.
Yeah, and I think as adverse events happen, like different deaths because of you know, IV hydration or
Right,
maybe semaglutide or whatever, there'll be more and more enforcement. So
right.
I think to prepare for what's coming, which I think will be more and more enforcement, it's a good idea just to do good faith exams whenever you're doing anything that could be considered medical. So even if you're doing like IV hydration only with vitamins, even if your state hasn't specifically said a good faith exam is needed, I think it's still best practice to do it to be protected.
100%. I would agree with that. So is there anything that you, or a way that you recommend maybe that clients of yours or clients of ours can kind of stay up to date with these opinions by their state medical board or recommendations? Do you post those? Well, how can people sort of stay abreast of what is happening in their state?
Yeah, so two ways. One, we do have a blog that's very active. We post several times a week with different state updates. So you could get on our mailing list and that's free. And then we'll keep you posted as to the more major stuff. And then in terms of state specific stuff, if you're a client, we send alerts whenever new laws or new regulations come out to our clients based on the state that they're in. And then the third way is most boards have a website these days and have a mailing list, and will send you notices when new meetings or minutes come out. So you could subscribe to those, and then you could read what happened at the meeting, and then you could tell from that meeting like what the boards are being focused on and like who got their license suspended and all that kind of gossipy stuff.
I think that's such a great idea that people don't talk about enough. Sign up for your state board's mailing list. And if you want some bedtime reading material, you read through what the latest agendas have been in the minutes. And I think that would be very insightful for people who really want to make sure that they're staying on top, and not only on top, but ahead of what might be coming in the future.
Yeah, definitely. And it's free.
Yeah, that's great. Even better. Well, Sara, how can people get in touch with you if they are interested in your services?
Yeah, so our website is www.lengealaw.com. That's also our Instagram, and we're pretty active on social media, and on our website is a phone number that people can call or text, or you can email us. So there are many, many different ways. I mean, I wake up every day and I have like Facebook, Instagram messages from people. And I love that because it's great to be connected to our clients in the way they want to be connected.
Right. And I know you are traveling to San Diego soon, right? For a conference?
Yes, in September.
Fabulous. So people can find you there if they'll be here for the iSpan conference?
The iSpan conference. Yeah, that's a great conference. That's really focused more on like education and less on like vendors selling devices.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think this one is great because it's not like this giant, I don't know, party where
Sort of a
people are trying to,
yeah, it's not a walking advertisement everywhere you go either.
yeah. So, hopefully, we'll hang out in person then.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sara, for being here today.
Thank you. It was really nice. I appreciate it very much, Paulina.
You're welcome.